Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina took a harsher stance towards striking auto workers on Monday than many of his fellow Republican presidential candidates, saying it did not make sense for workers to want higher pay for shorter work weeks, and noting approvingly that President Ronald Reagan had fired federal employees for striking. I think Ronald Reagan gave us a great example when federal employees decided they were going to strike, Mr. Scott said at a campaign event in Iowa in response to a voter who had asked whether he would insert himself into the United Auto Workers talks as president. He said, "You strike, you're fired. Simple concept to me, to the extent that we can use that once again." He went on to criticize federal funding for private sector union pension plans and said, with regard to UAW dispute, the other things that are really important in that deal is that they want more money working fewer hours. They want more benefits working fewer days. In America, that doesn't make sense, he said. That's not common sense. Members of the United Auto Workers Union went on a targeted strike on Friday against three automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis. The workers are seeking a raise of up to 40%, which would correspond with pay increases for their company's executives over the past decade, and 4-day work weeks, along with cost of living adjustments and a restoration of previously fortified pensions. Despite Mr. Scott's approving reference to Reagan, who fired thousands of striking air traffic controllers in 1981, United Auto Worker members are not federal employees and cannot be fired by the president. Federal labor law also protests them from being fired by their employers for striking. Mr. Scott's campaign emphasized the rest of his answer, his rejection of taxpayer funding for any deal, and said the Reagan portion had referred to federal workers, not the UAW, but it declined to respond on the record when asked why he had brought up Reagan's firing of federal workers, if that had no relevance to the UAW dispute. Senator Scott has repeatedly made clear, both at the event and others, that Joe Biden shouldn't leave taxpayers on the hook for any labor deal, a campaign spokesman, Matt Gorman, said. Mr. Scott's criticism of the workers' demands set him apart from many other Republican candidates who have commented on the UAW strike, though not all of them have weighed in. While most of the other candidates have been critical of unions in general, while with particular vitriol for teachers' unions, they have generally expressed sympathy with the auto workers' economic concerns. Former President Donald J. Trump is actively trying to court the striking workers while denouncing their leaders. He has cast the workers as victims of Biden administration rules intended to ensure that 2/3 of new passenger cars sold in the United States are electric by 2032. Three other candidates, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, former Vice President Mike Pence, and Governor Doug Burgum of North Carolina, have also brought up the push for electric vehicles and offering sympathy directly or obliquely for the workers. Mr. Pence has emphasized inflation too, while denying that the growing gap between workers and executive salary is a factor, though the workers themselves have cited it. One exception to the trend was Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, who has proudly described herself as a union buster. She told Fox News after UAW strike began that it would increase auto prices and hurt consumers, and that President Biden was to blame because his support had encouraged unions to make unreasonable demands. When you have the most pro-union president, he touts that he is emboldening the unions. This is what you get, she said, and I'll tell you who pays for it is the taxpayers. So listen, Scott was someone who I really did have some sympathy for, because he's a guy who's not really, he has no chance of winning. He has no chance of winning this primary for things that are largely out of his control. I don't think Republicans are going to nominate an African American for their presidential nominee. We've seen this with Herman Cain, Alan Keyes, and Ben Carson. And also, a lot of people were like harassing him about being single, which I don't think is anyone's business besides his own. And I did defend him on that, although not in the video, so I guess I should say that's something that I would have spoken more on if I thought it was a big deal. But the true controversy of this campaign, the true thing that people should, that like, if we had a really decent media, would just be hammering him for nonstop, over and over, is his response to this. The UAW workers are striking with some pretty fair goals in mind. They want more pay, 4 days a week, and they want their pay to match or be somewhat equivalent to the pay raises of the people that are at the top. And for the life of me, because, you know, I've said before, Trump is smart. Trump is someone who was able to be the first person ever to be elected president without any military or government experience. And one of the reasons that he was able to do that is because he is at least decent at pretending to be a pro-worker candidate. The forgotten man and woman, right? That was one of the things he said during his 2016 campaign. Now, of course, he had net job outsourcing and did his own trade deal that shipped even more jobs over to other countries. But at the very least, he can pretend to be sympathetic towards workers. He can make it seem that he's their friend, even if he's waiting to put the knife in their backs too. Someone like Scott is so dumb that he invokes Reagan, who all the Republicans still like to pretend is relevant, even though he really is not, in a situation that is not of any equivalence with what is going on now. Those striking air traffic controllers that Reagan fired in '81 were not federal, were federal employees, excuse me. So to invoke what a president does in response to a union striking in a situation where the president, because these workers for the UAW are not federal employees, so therefore they can't be fired by the president, it's him showing his own lack of details, his own lack of thought about this, and again trying to like do the whole Reagan invoking thing that all these people have done over the last year or so. All these candidates have anyway. But man, his response is it is besides Haley, it's the most tone deaf out of anyone. I mean, to even be able with a straight face to say that if you strike, you're fired. If you boycott or protest the fact that your job is not paying you enough to make ends meet, you will be let go of your job. I don't know how any candidate who wants to get regular blue collar people to vote for them would even try to like make that sound as if it's a normal or rational thing to say about how you would respond to a strike. And thank God for federal labor laws that protect workers from being fired by their employees for striking, because otherwise, if we lived in Scott's America, they could just say, oh, you want to protest because you want to get paid $2 more an hour, $10 more a day, or some other 2-digit number? Get out of here. I'll get somebody else to do this cheap labor for me. And Haley showed her own stupidity. When you have the most pro-union president that touts he is emboldening the unions, this is what you get. That doesn't have a damn thing to do with Biden being pro-union. This is all what the reason this is what you get is when you have people at the top, employers, who don't give an iota of a damn about any of the people that work for them, which is why they're totally fine raising their own salaries, those at the top, by 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and they throw a little crumb, oh, here's an extra dollar every maybe 10 years or 15 years at the people that are the life and blood and sweat of their actual companies. God, what an idiotic response on her part. When you have the most pro-union president and he touts he is emboldening the unions, this is what you get. You get this when you treat the people that work for you like crap, when you're a major multi-billion-dollar company that could afford to give these people some raises if you wanted to. Talking about the taxpayers the taxpayers aren't involved. The taxpayers support this. They don't like seeing people work to the sweat of their brow, and then if they want just a little bit more money, oh no, sorry. God, the whole like, I get the Republican response to this is going to be partisan. They're all going to blame Biden in one way or the other, especially Pence, who's talking about inflation, and he's trying to say that the growing gap between workers and executive salaries isn't a factor, even though the people who are actually striking are saying it is a factor. So like literally denying reality for the sake of his own fledgling campaign. But Scott's response to this is terrible. Like, him and Haley have two of the worst responses to this out of any politicians across all of America. Like, not even just the candidates, just people in general. Like, they're arguably even worse than like Bill Maher or Drew Barrymore, one of those people who's like, oh, workers are striking in Hollywood. Well, time to resume my show because, at the very least, you could kind of like flip the switch and say, okay, these are just regular people. They don't know much about policy. They're probably not that familiar with unions. They've got a silver spoon in their mouth, so they've never had to like actually strike. Haley and Scott are two people who in South Carolina were federal officials who actually have control over government policies to some extent or another. Haley was the chief executive of her state. Scott is one of the 100 most powerful people in all of the, in the Senate. He has a sizable portion of influence on policies, right? He gets to vote on something, and if enough people vote the way he does along with in the House, then it becomes a law. And like, to see someone who's got that much power say something this insane, make a comparison that has nothing to do with the current situation, because the federal employees that Reagan fired are totally different from the non-federal employees of UAW that are striking for some higher wages. It's nuts. It's really insane. And like, just to close this out, because I want to reread his comment here, because it's another one of these, like, I'm just gonna try to put it this way. He says the other things that are really important is in that deal is that they want more money working fewer hours. Why the hell do you have to work overtime just to survive? Does he not know what a pay raise is? That sometimes, by virtue of how many years and decades go by, you may need to raise the amount of money people work for, otherwise they can't afford their house or to live somewhere. They want more benefits working fewer days. I really despise these bastards, because they'll sit here and talk about the welfare state and all these people who won't get up and go to work, but then the people who go to work say, hey, look, man, can I get some paid days off, a few days a week? Can I get at least one day after 4 days of manual labor to like rest? And maybe can I get an extra couple of dollars for my hours that I'm already putting in, for the over 30 hours I'm already working? And he says to them, you want more for less, as if they're not already doing what he and the rest of these pull yourself up by your bootstraps douchebags preach year after year. So I say this with complete sincerity. I look forward to his campaign gaining no traction, to him dropping out either before or right after Iowa, and to him retiring from the Senate in a few years, as he said he would do, because he claimed this would be his last term. I'm very excited for the withdrawal of Tim Scott from American politics, because we don't need any more anti-union, anti-increasing already stagnant wages by just a little bit pro-corporate executives bastards running the country. I'm tired of them.